Alright, I'm going to get started. The first thing we're going to do today is go over Chapter 6. Then I'm going to talk about a few general things with you. It won't take very long. I do have your tests graded. I'll give those back. Alright, I want you to look at them, but I do want the test pages back. Alright, so by the end of the period, by and large, people did well. A few people struggled. Okay, I will tell you that as of right now, everyone in this class has got an A going. So after the first four written tests and the first hands-on test, everybody has an A going. So that's good. All right. So Chapter 6 in your book, I don't know what page we're on, around 200. How to use CSS for page layout. You will be asked to do some of this on your next test. All right, so if you look in here, notice what they talk about. They talk about fixed width layout, and they will also talk about what's referred to as basically a fluid layout. So in other words, do you want it always to be a certain width regardless of the type of medium you're looking at, or do you want it to be able to adapt based on the kind of medium you're looking at? That's going to drive me nuts, so let me do that. Okay. All right. So let's get started. Now, as you'd probably guess, when you're doing this, some of the key to doing this, maneuvering and putting stuff on the page, involves floating. We talked a little bit about floating. This chapter talks about floating in more depth and breadth of coverage. Okay? Now, I'm going to mention something because this just popped into my head right now. I don't want to go back and check the table of contents or anything, but I know soon that we're going to be getting into talking about both responsive layout, and we're going to be talking about CSS Grid, and we're going to be talking about Flexbox. You can read a lot of articles online that will basically say that Flexbox is replacing floating. All right. Now, let's just say that you want to learn Flexbox. All right. You're like, okay, Jeff said this is really powerful stuff. There's actually, it looks a little hokey, okay? And I don't know if they're going to actually give you this as an assignment or what, but there's actually something that's called flexboxfroggy.com. All right? And yeah, there it is. And it's several lessons, and you walk through it, you make the frog move around, etc. Normally, they give you a lot of stuff to type in, and then you see the result immediately when you type something in. All right? And whether you're assigned this or whether you're not assigned this, okay, I mean, it's very important that you learn it because it really helps in laying stuff out on a screen. All right? Okay, so when you float, notice there's only three possibilities. You float left, you float right, or you have no floating whatsoever. Once you start floating, so let's say that I said float left. Everything will be floating until you turn it off with a clear. All right, sometimes that confuses people. Okay, but as it says, it determines whether or not an element is cleared from floating both left and right. Now, they're mentioning something in here, and you're going to see in this chapter a lot of little drawings that they made. But notice what they have in here is they have a thing here called an aside. Aside is another one of these HTML5 tags. All right. You know, again, I say this, and I don't know anymore because, you know, you're young people, so I don't really know. But my guess is at one time or another, everybody in this room has seen a newspaper. All right. And I don't mean an online newspaper. I just mean a newspaper. Okay. And let's assume that for a second that, you know, person X, the main story on the page is they saved someone. There was a fire and they saved someone. So, you know, you go and you look the next day and in the paper, they've got a big article and it takes up maybe that much of the screen, and it's all on this person and the fact that they saved someone. Okay? There's a picture and an article, etc. And then over here, they've got an article where, mom says, he was always a hero to me. So in other words, they've got a little story off to the side about the same thing. Do you all understand what I'm talking about? That is basically, that's kind of an aside. All right? It's something that's known as being tangential. So in other words, the story would be just fine without it. But the idea is it adds a little bit more to the story by putting it in. All right? And typically with an aside, it's off to the side. It can be off to the left-hand side, it can be off to the right-hand side, or you could have an aside on both sides. And you're going to see that in this chapter. When you've got your main story like I just showed you and an aside, that would be a 2-column format. If you had an aside on the left, your main content in the middle, and an aside on the right, that's a 3-column format. So that's what they're going to be talking about in here. Normally, whether it's a web page or a newspaper, you don't see much more than that. It's not that you can't do it, but if you put too many columns, especially on a screen, it's really hard to read. Even if you've got a big screen, it's hard enough to read. Plus, when you start talking about responsive text, you have to worry about if I see it on my phone, there's no way that I'm going to be able to have 4 columns. So it's going to have to shrink down to 1 column, and it means it's going to be longer type of thing. All right, so they've got this aside here. It says the luncheon starts 15 minutes after the lecture ends. Then they've got this main section. All right, now there's nothing really on here. When you look at the CSS, there's really not much of anything you haven't already seen. Okay, and if you take a look over here, if we look at this, there's the aside right there. So what do we have? Okay, notice that the aside is separate. It's not in our main area. It's on the side. All right, there's no firm and fast rule to doing this. Would it be possible if it really bugged the heck out of you? Could you put the aside in the main? Yes. All right, there's nothing to stop you from doing it. Okay, but when you take a look at this, it says our body has got a width of 500 pixels. Then with our footer, which is down here, with our main and with our aside, they all have no margin. They all have no top and bottom padding. They all have 20 pixels of left and right padding. All right. The aside, as it says, has some margin in it. Okay, it has a width. It's floating to the right. It's got a border around it. And notice the footer. It says clear both. Even though the only floating we're doing is to the right, we could have said clear right, but typically when you want to, in a footer, if you want to clear everything, you say clear both. Okay? And the reason that that's important is had we not put the clear both in the footer, this footer would have automatically been, basically it would have floated around it. All right? And if you want to see, if you say, well, what happens if we just grab the text that's here or key it in and remove that line. You do have all this text, just so you know, you have all the text that's in the book. All right? So as it says, when you float an element to the left or right, the content that follows flows around it. All right? When you use float, you also need to set its width. To stop floating, you use the clear property. So as they mentioned, the example above, if the clear property wasn't set, the content will flow into the space beside the floated element. That can get some really weird effects if you forget to turn off your floating. So here's a 2-column fixed width format. You see a lot of sites that are like this. Now, the majority of the sites that you see like this, I don't even care what they say next. I haven't looked at this yet. I went and looked at it yesterday, but I haven't looked at it yet today. You'll notice that the header, first of all, when you look in here, okay, the HTML is really everything that's inside of here, including this tan area, left and right, top and bottom. All right? The body is the area that's inside there that you see it's got a little It looks like it laced, like it's got a little 1 pixel border or something around it. You'll notice that the header and the footer stretch the entire width of the body. You'll notice that the main content takes up part of the body and the aside takes up another part of the body. Normally when you do it this way, you set it up with percentages. You don't set it up with a number of pixels. You don't set it up with a number of M's or rems or points. You do it with percentages. So for instance, let's just assume this was 66% and that was 33%, or 66.6, 33.3, etc. That kind of an idea. That would say that regardless of the size, when possible, I want you to take up 2/3 of the screen. I want you to take up 1/3 of the screen. All right. Now, if you're looking at it on a phone, typically it's going to stack. So you have the main content and the aside underneath it. So when they show this in here, again, notice they're saying that the width of the entire body, they are using pixels in here, so they're not using percentages. And I'm not saying that doing it that way is wrong. It's just that using percentages is better. All right. The idea, and one of the things we're supposed to get across to you in here, and I mentioned this in the first week of class, is that when you are planning a website, so let's say we had a brand new website. Let's say that Rankin didn't have a website and we were planning it. It's much easier to write the website and do it for a small device first and let it expand to a larger device than it is doing it the other way. There's so many more intricacies with putting something on your phone as opposed to putting it on a desktop or a laptop. All right? So they are using that in here. And again, you can see the picture and you can see the code. The reason I'm telling you this is it looks like I'm on page 205. This is one of those pages you might want to bookmark, dog ear, whatever. Put a little fold on it, because you're going to be asked to do something similar to what are on these pages on your next test. All right? And speaking of which, the plan is, we're going over Chapter 6 today. Okay? Whatever time we have left will be lab. You have lab the next 2 days. Lab all period tomorrow, lab all period on Friday. Okay, so that is almost 8 hours that you have, and in that time, you should be able to finish all the labs that are due Friday by the time you leave, and at least get a start on the next stuff. I'll be heading that stuff out today. All right? All right. And again, I don't want to sit and read this. The author explains how that was done and then says that there's an alternative to it. Of course, there's always alternatives to this stuff. In other words, there are always ways that you can do it. And really, the way the author just explained it was fixed. Using pixels or points are fixed units. Using percentages will result in floating. So it doesn't really look any different here from the previous picture. But notice now they're using percentages. One of the first things they're doing, notice the author is saying, hey, body, use 90% of the width. That's why you get the 5% here and the 5% here. See that? And it'll always, regardless of how much you shrink the screen, will only take up 90%. You don't always want to do that, because when you look at it, again, you're using a phone and you're looking at a website on your phone and you're looking at it portrait. 10% is enough for you to be losing. So you may not want to set it up like that when you get to a certain width. But you'll notice if you look on here, this is what's changed. So the width of the body is 90%. Out of that 90%, 2/3 of that, basically, okay, is used for main. 1/3 of that is used for the aside. Now, one thing to realize when they say 66 and 33, that's not 66% of the screen. That's 66% of the body. So that's 2/3 of this that you see in here, or 1/3 of this that you saw in there. All right, and you notice we're saying we want main to float left and the aside to float right. All right, so they show you the CSS when they're both fluid, And then they show you the CSS when the aside is fixed and the section is fluid. So what's different? Notice in the first case, they're both percentages. In the second case, the aside is an exact amount. All right, it's fixed. It says the benefit of using fluid columns is the size of the page is adjusted based on the size of the browser. So as you grow and shrink, you can do some of this yourselves. So I can go out to this, froggy thing that's right here, and you'll notice that when I change it, how it changes. All right. The disadvantage, it says, is changing the size of the columns may affect the typography or appearance of the page. As an example, okay, I just looked at this. What your next test that you're going to take, I'd originally rewritten it because I didn't think they did a good enough job of explaining things. And one day when I opened it, I didn't realize, but I had my browser was real narrow. And I put arrows and stuff all over the place in the article so you could see what went with what. The arrows looked like they were all out of place because the document was set up so that it was fluid. My arrows weren't set up so that it was fluid because I didn't have that document. I was just adding basically to a PDF document. All right. So, again, how to use floating in the 3-column fixed. So now notice, you've got basically on both sides. And I think you all realize this. It's not that sidebar A and sidebar B have to be the same width. You might want that. Some people are really into symmetry, all right, and some people are not. It depends on the content, the importance, all sorts of stuff. But again, you'll notice that the header and the footer both take up 100% of what you've got allocated for the body. And again, you'll notice 964, 180 pixels, 600 pixels, 180 pixels. All right? And 180 plus 600 is 780, and 180 is 960, not 964. We've got a little bit of space that we can potentially leave in here to put in between things. And as they say, the first aside is floated to the left, the main content is floated to the left also, and the second aside is floated to the right. And again, they give you an alternative. There's always, as far as I can tell at least, if you want to do something, there's always a multiple number of ways of doing it. All right? And again, especially with where you are in your programmatic careers right now, so okay, you told us there's a lot of ways to do it. Which way should we use? The one that makes the most sense to you. That's what you should use. All right? So here's 2 web pages that use a 2-column fixed layout. That's 2 columns. There's the main that's on the left, and you can see floated on the right is this thing called lecture notes. Now, it's not that you had to do this, but hopefully you agree that at least adding a splash of color on there makes it easier to see, kind of delineates the two, for lack of better words. All right? And again, it's not that you had to do that, but imagine that they didn't put the color in here. All right? You may or may not even realize that this is basically separate than this is. All right? And as always, it says, the web page illustrates a common page layout with a header, 2 columns, and a footer. So header takes up the whole room, 2 columns here and here, footer takes up the whole thing. And again, they've delineated this stuff with the underline here or whatever. I don't know if they put a box. Looks like there's a box around the whole thing there. And maybe these are horizontal rules. I don't know. I don't really care. But you can really see what's what by taking a look at it. Okay? All right. It says the columns for the page are coded as a section element and an aside element. I've read different authors, and people will disagree on what's an aside, what's a section, etc. When HTML5 came out and they came out with these semantic elements, they were guidelines. All right? There's nobody that says you've got to do it like this. There's no governing body that sets up stuff like that. You could have two different companies that set up their websites differently as far as the sides, sections, main, etc., and they could look almost identical to one another. All right. So they say, yeah, there it is. They're using a bottom border there that they're applying to the header and a top. So this is a bottom border. That's a top border. Again, you could have probably done the same thing using an HR or horizontal rule that puts a line underneath there, and then just taken the horizontal rule, say that you want it 100%, which it is by default, and given it a color. That's, again, just another alternative. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this. So they show you that, then they show you the HTML, and again, there really is not much of anything in here you haven't already seen. And then they show you the CSS, I believe. And as always, they try to show you this and with this mustard color or whatever it is. Again, they're showing you, you'll notice this is fixed. You'll notice the width is fixed. All right. They are starting to bring in M's in here. Page 2. Then I believe they're going to, okay, this is the speaker page. Again, there's a lot of similarities here. It's not so much that you have to make the header on every page the same. And you'll notice that in here they don't have a nav bar. But let's just assume that we did. All right? It's very common practice then that this would look the same on each page, and you'd have a nav bar over here or down here or wherever, and you'd be able to iterate between pages by clicking on the nav bar. All right. You may or may not have noticed this. I don't know if I mentioned this to you or not, but in the Travis Tritt website that we looked at, this is travistritt.com. All right. If I click news, I'm still on travistritt.com. If I go to music, I'm still on travistritt.com. If I go to tour, I'm still at travistritt.com. However, if I go to store, now I'm at travistritt.richardsandsouthern.com. And you'll notice this looks different. All right. The heading looks different. You're not able to go back technically to where you were before. You haven't left the site, but you've gone to a different portion of the site. Every site sets this kind of stuff up differently. All right. And again, with the speaker page, they show you the HTML. Okay, and they're linking to a different HTML file. And then they'll show you the CSS. Okay. Now, how to use CSS to create text columns. This is kind of important. So if you look here, it says Figure 610 summarizes the properties for creating text columns. All right. There is a thing in there called column count. When you set up column count, that's how many columns you actually want. This not always, but probably more often than not, is more important with textual. So if you've got a textual page on a site, and you want to set it up in a columnar format. All right? You'll get something that looks like this. Now, it's not going to really be cut off like that, but they just did it because they just did partial screenshot. Now, it says, as of this writing, Firefox does not support the column span property. I can go out there, or you can go out there yourselves, but I showed you yesterday, caniuse.com. So you go out to caniuse.com and you would type in column-span. My guess is, because this book is 2 or 3 years old, it probably does support it now. All right. If you want the heading of an article to span the columns, you can code the HTML for the heading before the article. So in other words, you're telling the heading not to be affected by that. Now, here we didn't do that. You'll notice that the heading is inside of the columns. But if you wanted this heading to maybe stretch across all three columns, you wouldn't put the heading inside of the columnar format. It says if the columns are too narrow, an article becomes harder to read. Well, that's one of the reasons that when they set all this stuff up for phones, they set up the pinch and zoom type of thing. All right. Okay, here's a 2-column web page with a 2-column article in it. What's different here? This is, previously they took what was here and this was all in one column. You should notice some things when you look at this. Notice that they have set it up with a 2-column format, that the heading, it looks like, is inside of the 2-column format. They've got an image in here that my guess is when we look at it, it will float. All right. And notice article, which is this, column count 2. As it says, it shows how easy it is to divide an article into columns. It says if you compare this with the one we looked at before, it's easier to read because the lines are shorter, but not too short. You may or may not agree with that. All right, and again, if you, let's just assume that you leave here, let's say you've got a few years of experience and you decide to open up your own consulting firm, which happens. All right, if somebody says, if you give them this, I liked it better with 1 column, you don't say, well, this is, no, you don't try to convince them. The other thing, too, is a lot of times what will happen, you'll be like, in the back of your mind, you're going, well, you're going to want me to change this. Or you're going to want it back to the way I showed you because this just isn't going to work. Well, remember, that's more work for you in the future. All right? You can suggest that to people. The other thing, too, is when you're working with this, especially if you're a consultant, let's say that you agree with a customer, I'm doing these 10 things. You're paying me $1,000. I'm creating a website for you that's got these 10 things in it. Okay? As a really good developer, you should do those 10 things. And I'm not trying to sound like a jerk, but not anymore. Because if you're doing these 10 things and you've done 8, you realize, oh, you probably wanted this too. Okay? If you go back to the person who you've done the contract for, and you ask them if they want it, what are they going to say? Yeah, I wanted you to do that too. But now you're not getting paid for it. And you might say, well, it's just the right thing to do. Maybe it is. All right, but that's why when you go through this stuff, there's a maintenance part of the project that you're working on. And that's when they come back and they say this. I'll tell you this very quickly. All right. I taught for 3 years, and then I went to an aerospace company, and I worked there for a year. And the first week that I was there, they asked me if I would build them this order entry system. And I said, okay, what language do you want it in? They said, what do you know? And I told them there was maybe 6 or 7 languages that I knew. And they said, well, we support all of them, so whatever one's easiest for you. Well, that was nice. All right. And then the guy who ran this place said there's a couple things that I want. He said, first of all, I want this to be the background to be my favorite color, which I called putrid purple, because it was just really ugly. All right. And he said, second, when you remove something from here, and I can't make this stuff up. He said, I want basically the funeral march to play. Dum, dum, da-dum, dum, da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. I thought to myself, this is ridiculous. But you know what? He was in charge. And I thought, he's going to come back to me in a week or two and tell me that the people who use this are complaining about the color and they're complaining about the sound and get rid of both of them. That's exactly what happened. All right, but I didn't tell him because he was in charge at the beginning. That's a stupid color, and that's stupid to go, or even say it nice. I knew that there was a good chance that would happen eventually. Right? So again, let's see. Yeah, I think we hit that stuff. Okay, this is the other part of the chapter, and this also is important. How to position an element. And there are 4 ways that you can position an element. And they're shown right here. The default is static. It goes where you put it. You don't do any special positioning. The second way, as it says right there, is absolute. It says the element is removed from the flow and is positioned relative to the closest containing block, determined by the top, left, bottom, and right property. It's absolutely positioned on the page right here. And you can also absolutely position it to where it doesn't matter if you arrow up the page, arrow down the page, it stays right there. You can do that if you want to. All right? There may be a reason for doing that. I mean, if you work at a company and you've got a big sale going on and you want everybody to know, no matter where they are on the page, hey, they click there, they can get more information about the sale. All right? There's fixed. As it says, it's positioned relative to the browser window. And there's relative. By default, it says here, static positioning is used to position block elements from top to bottom and inline from left to right. It's just kind of the way we do things. In this country, we read from left to right. I know in other countries, they go from right to left. All right? To change the positioning, it says you can code the position property. Now, I'm just going to show you this. I'm going to break off from this for a minute. And I want to show you this right here. We'll talk about this one in a bit. But you know that footer that we worked on and we put it at the bottom and some of you said you had problems with it, etc. One thing is if you put in footer, now you might add other stuff to it, but if you say position fixed bottom 0, that's going to put it down here, way on the bottom of the page, no matter how big the page is or how small the page is, and it won't move from there. All right, you may have noticed on yours, your footer, you know, whether it was horizontal or vertical, you know, if you put it down at the bottom, it looked pretty close, unless you put a lot of line breaks or something in there. It looked pretty close to the actual content. This is one way to force it, always at the bottom. But notice what we're using in here, fixed positioning. And we're telling it bottom 0, which means literally after the bottom, there should be nothing else there. Now, they also mention this, and I'm just trying to mention things to you. There is something that's called a z-index. All right? That becomes important if I have two things on the same page that are occupying the same place on the page. By default, whichever one I put in second will write over the one that's in there first. Do you understand what I'm saying? So let's say that I had a picture and then I put another image for some reason like almost right over it, but they were different sizes. So let's say the first one that I put in, the background one, was a little bit bigger. I'd be able to see a little bit of it sticking out. All right? But if you want to be able to put stuff to the foreground or background, you can use the z-index property. The higher the number you put in there, the more it comes towards the foreground. The lower the number you put in there, the more it gets pushed to the background. Now that, a lot of times, you might see an entire website, even a complex website, where they do little to nothing with z-indexes. All right? So, they go through all of these. So the first one says how to use absolute positioning. All right? And the key thing is right there. Notice the body has got relative positioning, okay? But the aside has absolute positioning. So there it is within the browser. The only way that this is going to make sense to you is when you start to do the homework and you play with it. And look at it this way. I know he's like, oh my God, he sounds like a teacher. But when you make a mistake, it's a good thing. If you put it in there and everything works right away, okay, did you really learn a lot? You may have and you may not have. All right. When I did my first program ever, when I took my first real programming language ever, I still remember 112 errors. I'm like, geez, am I ever going to get this stuff? The guy next to me had 2 errors, took him, fixed it like that, and went home. All right, but I went through every error and I did them top to bottom, which is the way you should do it. And the next time I had a program, no, I didn't have no errors. No, I didn't have 2 errors, but I had a lot less than 112. And this person had a lot more errors. All right. So when you use absolute positioning, the remaining elements on the page are positioned as if the element was not there. As a result, you might need to make room for the positioned element. When you used fixed positioning, the position applies to the browser window and the element doesn't move even as you scroll. All right, so we used here absolute. It's going to be right here, but as you scroll, it'll leave. If you use fixed, even as you scroll, this would stay right there on the screen. So as it says, here's the sidebar that uses fixed positioning. And you'll notice what you can get with that. All right. Now, there's one case where, wow, okay, so you just said if I use the z-index on here, I could make that. Yeah, but then this is going to disappear. This is just not very well set up. The author put it like this to show you a point. All right. As it says, the HTML for the page has the same structure as shown earlier. Fixed positioning is used to fix the sidebar at the right of the browser window. When the window is too narrow to display all the elements on the page, it overlaps. We're going to learn when we start talking about responsive website design how to get past that. All right, so don't worry about it for right now. Because the sidebar uses fixed positioning, it's not necessary to float it in the article. And that's it. Now, one thing I wanted to mention to you too. There is something else that's not mentioned in this chapter, but I'm going to show it to you, and that's right here. Let's assume that I put a div in. I give the div an ID of story. Are you with me? I give the div an ID of story, and I put in 15 paragraphs. Okay? And I put in this in the CSS. What this is going to say is if I've got 300 pixels or above, make it 3 columns wide. So if my screen width is 300 columns or above, make it 3 wide. But as you make it smaller, automatically collapse it to 2 and then to 1. So there's some responsiveness built in when you use this. This is not the columns count property that we looked at. This is just a columns property. And you give it, basically you're saying, this is the minimum size, I want it to be that many columns. All right, there's a couple more things I wanted to mention to you. First, and I sent you this morning. You don't have to go look at it right now, but I just want you to see this. It is possible that you can do all your Git work, your pushing, everything you do, you can do it right from inside of VS Code. All right? So if I bring up VS Code right here, what you may or may not notice, let's see, where is it? I don't know if I have to add any extensions or not. Okay, that's snippets. Come on. But, yeah, there is source control that is built into this. Okay? Source control, there we go. All right? So it says this folder currently doesn't have a Git. This is just some junk that I created. All right? So notice we can initialize the repository. We can do all sorts of stuff. Some people like to do everything that they do. Everything. They like to do it right through Git Bash, like I showed you. Okay? Other people like working through here. Some people just bounce back and forth between the two. Okay? If I go into here, and let's see. View. Okay, if I keep going and I go to view, under view, there's the thing under view here that will say terminal. See this? So I did view terminal, and it's going to open up a terminal right here. Okay, and really it's down here because I still have my stuff here, but there's the terminal. Why am I showing you this? because you can set that terminal up so it's git bash. Okay? So you type stuff in here, you're done, you come down here, and you just run all your commands. So if you want to run it that way, you can. All right? But the article that I gave to you here, it's called Using Version Control in VS Code. It explains, it mentions, first of all, there are different source control managers, not just Git. It concentrates on Git because Git is by far the most popular one, but it's not the only one. There are other ones. And you take a look and see if there's something that you like more. In this program, we use Git. It's the most popular. All right, there's the most documentation, and most people, I think, would agree. It's probably the most intuitive. Okay? But if you go through this, it's 13 pages, but what they do in here is they go through how you set everything up, what all the stuff in here means, Git support, etc. All the stuff I've been mentioning to you, I don't use it. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. That doesn't mean you shouldn't use it. I want to give you some alternatives, and then you pick the one that makes the most sense to you. Down at the bottom of this article, it says intro video, Git version control, and I put the link in there. It's only 4-minute long video. You can look at that and they show you how you can do some stuff in there as well. All right. So that was the first thing. Second, and I forgot to provide this for you, but I can email it to you later. Let's see, where is it? The 25 best VS Code extensions. Now, if you read an article online that says, for example, the best restaurants in Wentzville, Missouri. Well, are those truly the best restaurants in Wentzville, Missouri? In that person's opinion, they are. All right. But to say these are the 25 best VS Code extensions means, in the opinion of the person who wrote this article, and Adava, if I pronounced it right, okay, in her opinion, these are the best. Some of these things in here, like live server is one of the ones that's in here. Some of the ones that are in here are actually more for the class that you will take a year from now, because they deal with things like Node.js that we're not going to touch in this class. But some of the stuff that's in here, I will send you this article in just a bit. You might take a look at. You don't have to load any of them, but you might decide that you want to. All right. Next thing. Like I said, I'm just trying to throw a few miscellaneous things in here to you. I don't know any of you very well personally. I probably never will get to know any of you really well personally. But some people, when they're not around, if I would, let's just say that the first day of class, I send out a survey, and I ask in here hobbies. Okay? Some people would put down, I love to read. Some people would say, I love playing with a computer. That is a hobby to me. All right? If you're one of those kind of people, and again, I'm not saying you are or are not, just to give you a couple things, this thing is called dzone.com. If you go out and register, you get articles from them. And you get a lot of articles. So why should you care? I would just want to show you an example. This was what I got one day from them recently. These are all links to articles. 11 best CSS frameworks to look forward to in 2020. CSS box model, a beginner's guide. Most of these are 2 or 3 pages long, these articles. They're not long. You don't have to sign up for this. But if you decide you want some more, so to speak, go out to dzone.com. Okay? I'm just throwing a few of these at you here. Another one that I get articles from, it lists a little goofy looking logo, but it's codeproject.com. These are going to be much more in-depth articles. Some of them will be 10 to 50 pages long. How to build an entire shopping cart using JavaScript, step-by-step type of thing. All right, so you can go in there and take a look. And again, I don't get emails from dzone other than the stuff like I showed you. They don't give me any advertising, none of that stuff. Occasionally I'll get an advertisement from Code Project, not very often. All right. Another one that's in here is javacodegeeks.com. Now you might look at that and go, well, we're not doing Java yet. I get that. But they have other stuff. They don't just have Java in here. This will give you ads, just so you know. They have stuff that's on sale, through different companies all the time. So you will get stuff from them. All right. This is another one. Quora. But a lot of times, if you have a question on something and you're looking for a very generic article on it, it's not a bad place to go out to. And finally, and I forgot to even bring this up, StackOverflow.com. StackOverflow.com, for lack of better words, is a question and answer thing that's run by developers for developers. Okay? And I would just say you can sign up for that. Don't start asking questions as a first semester student. Because what's going to happen is they'll tell you, you're asking in the wrong format, this is a stupid question, and people will say stuff like that, and they'll say worse stuff. These are developers, and sometimes they're very crude. They don't drop F-bombs or anything like that. But they will say, what an asinine thing to even ask. You'll see stuff like that in there. All right? But they've got guidelines for how to pose questions, etc. How that if you're going to put in a question, you may have to even add your code, etc. Remember, if you put your code out there, now anybody and everybody can see it. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but other people can comment on it and say, well, this was really written in a very bad way, type of thing. Okay? All right. That Flexbox Froggy, I already mentioned to you. Okay? So, there's one more thing that I wanted to say, and that's this. Let's assume that you were working on that first article. I want to walk through a few things with you here. It won't take very long. Where is that? All right. Here's that all web dev coursework thing. I'm just going to copy that over to here for right now. So let's assume I'm working on the first assignment that's in there. You with me? So I'm working on the first assignment. All right. So I already have a GitHub repository called All Web Dev Coursework. The same thing as this. All right. I was able to, even I know with yours and with yours, even the people who had problems, I was able to read everybody's, to go out and read everybody's portfolio from your GitHub account. I had no problem with it. All right. One thing you're going to notice is if other people go out to your GitHub page, for example, any project that you've made private will not show in your listing of projects. That makes sense? Because it's private. All right. So, almost done here. All right. So there it is. So I'm going to open it up, and you'll notice I've already got it set up with a Git folder in it, which means it should be ready for me to work on. Does that make sense? All right. So I'm going to go over here, and I just, again, because a couple of you have asked about this directly or indirectly. So notice there's that Muroc folder in there. These are all the book apps. So this is everything that's in the book. So if you forget how to do something, or you want to look at how to do something, or you're like, I don't really want to key that in, you can go out there and grab the code and run it from there or whatever. So there's apps, book examples, the exercises, I'm not even sure what they are, the slides. I think the first assignment you were supposed to do, and again, I didn't put these slides in there or the revised ones, but I think most of the time you're going to be opening up the revised one. All right, so I'm going to open this, and I think they asked for like slide 15 or 16, but if you go up to the one they asked about, there's 15. There's 16. It was neither one of those. It's this one. All right. Now, could you literally go in and just grab all this code, copy it, and paste it into an editor? The answer is yes. I don't think you'll learn very much by doing that, but I guess you could. All right. But just to keep it easy here, what I'm going to do is I am going to grab it just because I don't want to waste your time. Again, I don't want you to do that, okay? But I'm just going to grab this and key that, or copy that rather. Now I'm going to go back into here and into my all web dev. Okay, I'm going to go back up another one. And I'm going to go to homework. And I'm going to go to HTML ch01. And I'm going to open up that index file, which to my knowledge, well, it's almost empty. Okay, so there it is. So if I save this now and I do a run and I run it, that's it. I don't care about the image. I care about when you're doing this. What I care about is that you write the right code. Does that make sense? All right. So if you look in here, and I've got this because I copied it, so it put this VT and thing in there. I don't even know what that is. It's assuming now that where I currently am, I've got JavaScript, jQuery, JPEG, and I don't. I could go out and probably find that. It probably is on there someplace, and I could bring it in. But again, I'm more concerned, what I'm looking at is the code. All right, so now I've done that, and I've saved. All right, now I'm going to go back to my, all the way up to the top here, right here. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to say, git bash here. Okay? I shouldn't have to do a git init because as you already saw, there's a git folder in there, and that's what git init does. It makes the repository. In fact, if I did a git init, it probably would tell me there already a repository already exists. But I want to be at my all web dev coursework. Now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say git add dot and hit enter. And it didn't do much. I really should have done a git status first, but I'll do it now. And what is it telling me? Well, it's basically saying this is what you've changed. Does that make sense? All right. So now I come in here. And I know Angie had asked me about this yesterday. I'm not picking on her. But when you put these in, so git commit -m, it probably would be a good idea to have your message reflect what this is. See what I'm saying? Something like Chapter 1 homework. Just something simple like that. All right? So I hit that. It says one file changed. All right, I think I've got all my stuff set up, but I'm not sure, but I'll try a git push origin master. If I don't have everything set up, it's going to give me an error. Looks like that's all there. Okay? And then when I go back to GitHub, and I find my all web dev coursework, which is right here. And you'll notice it makes it a lot easier for you and for me to go in here now and know exactly what's here. All right. So I go and click on the folder here. Double click it. I don't remember. All right. Chapter 1 homework. Just do that. And it shows it to me. And what's red is the way it used to look, and what's green is the way it looks right now. All right. What I'm going to do, I'm not going to lie to you. Even with 8 of you, there's enough stuff for me to grade. You know, I'm not going to guarantee that I'm going to run every one of these, but I'm going to look at the code to make sure that the code is set up okay. Does that make sense? All right. Is there anything that I've gone over in this lecture, whether it's Chapter 6, whether it's talking about VS Code, etc., that didn't make any sense, that anyone has any questions on? All right. Then in just a second, we're going to take a break. But before we do,